Welcome to the podcast, Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns. I'm Rosemary Truman, your host today. I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Advancing Innovation, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to have Ross DeVol joining us. He is the head of Heartland Forward. He's a Walton Fellow. He was the chief economist at the Milken Institute, a superstar of think tank scholars, and something close to my heart, somebody else who knows econometrics, which there aren't too many of us around. So Ross, thank you so much for taking the time today. Ross is really one of the very best thinkers as it comes to economics. So I'm really thrilled to have you.
Rosemary, I'm glad to be invited to participate, and this is an important topic for the future of the country.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to start with a study that we've done a couple of times at the Center for Advancing Innovation. About 10 years ago, we did a study that we called the Innovation Arms Race, where we basically compared different countries around the world in different metrics of innovation. We actually created a new model to determine what does innovation mean end to end. And what we found 10 years ago was that the United States was losing the innovation arms race, really from the front to the back. But in some categories, we were just slowing down. We repeated that study recently. Last year, we published it again, the innovation arms race. And we found that now the US, Europe, and the UK are quickly losing and have lost every single metric of the innovation arms race to China and other Asian countries. And we will have lost all of our advantage by 2025. Our prior study showed that we would lose our advantage in innovation by 2036. So you can see more rapidly we are losing our innovation strength in the United States and the UK and also Europe. And we look at what we're doing and also how we're doing it. So are we focused on the right things and are we doing them well? So the what and the how. And we look at, for example, patent effectiveness. You know, are we able to get the patents we put forth granted? And then how fast can we get those granted and so on. So I'm just going to pause there, and I'd like to get your reaction to that finding. And also, how can we turn this around?
No, all discouraging findings. I can't disagree with them. Maybe in some of the context, I could add a little bit of nuance to it. To some extent, I say the U.S. was so far ahead of all other major countries, others had to begin to close the gap. I mean, China was the world's largest economy 150 years ago. They've had some challenges, but their innovative culture, and I would expect them to begin to narrow the gap. I said that 15 years ago when I was interviewed in China on this subject. It is discouraging in the sense that we have not been increasing federal funding in R&D at the rate that we needed to. It has dissipated. We've seen the National Institutes of Health funding kind of actually decline in real terms in recent years. National Science Foundation funding, you can go through the various federal agencies. However, I will say this, despite all those metrics, you know, the gap in terms of patenting is declining, and there are some challenges in getting patents granted in the US, but we are still very efficient at commercializing our research into world-class companies and building world-class companies. That remains the United States' key economic advantage. We build the Googles, you go down the list of all those companies in Silicon Valley and across the country. So despite us losing some of the innovation advantage, especially medical research, China has been investing heavily, also in 5G, where the United States is no longer at the leading edge in all industries, which is discouraging, but I would say it's an aberration that we ever were. You know, innovation is spread around the world in various people, so we have to look at policies on what we can do to improve our performance. We have seen more of our federal spending go towards entitlements programs. I'm not disparaging that. And kind of as an aging culture and society, you see that in Europe, you tend to devote more resources towards that area. But my concern is we're eating some of our seed capital and innovation. You know, it's kind of view it as like a pipeline. What you put at the top of the funnel affects what goes through it and what comes out the other end. We need a renewed focus on the importance of innovation. And I would say one of the United States' remaining key innovation assets is our research universities. China, other countries are closing that gap at research universities, but they still, the American Research University is a unique entity because it conducts basic research, but also is very efficient at conducting applied research that can be commercialized. And so I think that is our crown jewel. Obviously, the federal government's programs that they fund in R&D feed into that. So we need to look at what we can do to limit the friction along that innovation pipeline and provide the proper incentives to commercialize and reward people for taking risks.
I think that's a wonderful perspective and very insightful. We also did a study on the value at stake of the research enterprise in the United States. It was funded by the Kauffman Foundation, where we analyzed universities, hospitals, and federal labs to determine, you know, what if we could do exactly what you just said, which was, you know, optimize our pipeline of innovation, get more of the value at stake, if you will, of the research enterprise out into the world. And so we were able to collect 8 years of data across 149 institutions in the United States. And of course, there's 5,000 research institutes. We were able to collect this, as I said, 149, that data for 149 of them. So the data was, again, the value at stake of the research enterprise. How many inventions do they have sitting on the shelf? What are they currently doing to get output in terms of startups and licensing our inventions out to companies? And what we found was that 0.01% of our inventions are getting translated out. And if we could increase the volume of that technology transfer to 6% at a 90% failure rate, or I like to say a 10% success rate, we could make a $1.5 trillion GDP impact on the US economy alone. And Kauffman went through our numbers with a fine-tooth comb in multiple ways. We actually did this analysis. We triangulated it in several different ways. And so actually it's quite a conservative number because we didn't even have data for, 4,850 approximately research institutes. So what do we do to remove some of this friction? I mean, the Center for Advancing Innovation, we're removing it. We're creating new licensing agreements. We are trying to systematically get inventions out through our challenge model. We have worked closely with the tech transfer units. Each one is different, as you know. And I could go on and on because we know the barriers to finding first of all, finding the inventions, then evaluating the inventions, then doing the deal. Those three things have to happen. And in fact, our analysis was not even done on anything that was not patented because we didn't have data for the inventions that are not patented. Right. And of course, we have large companies that are out there right now that have been born out of inventions that were not patented. So I'd love your perspective on what's the transformation that's needed, or is it just incremental steps? You mentioned policy. I'd love to hear your perspective on the levers.
Yeah, so all very important topics. To me, part of the answer is geographic, and it's one of the reasons why I sit here at Heartland Forward today, and why the idea of trying to make an impact on economic performance in the center of the country, the heartland, is so critical. I've done various studies over the years. The most recent one I did was at the Milken Institute. The last one looked at from concept to commercialization, the best universities for tech transfer. And we went through this elaborate ranking system in terms of which universities are best. And there are some in the American heartland. Purdue is great at it, very efficient. University of Illinois, University of Minnesota, UT Austin is very good at commercialization. University of Michigan. But if you look at where the research dollars go in those universities, the Heartland does a much better job of attracting those research dollars from the federal government and industry, but mostly the federal government, than when you look at outcome measures. Startups, licensing agreements, licensing income, and the various other metrics that one might use. So I believe that we need to look at the cultural resistance within universities here in the Heartland and across the country. I visited most of them, I've studied some, and it's really dramatic, the difference. I'll give you a great example. I used to sit there in Santa Monica on the west side of LA, overlooking the Santa Monica Pier, and UCLA was only 6 miles away. Within the UC system, a very innovative, very good at commercialization system, but yet UCLA scored very poorly over 10 years ago on various metrics of commercialization. Second in the country of NIH funding behind Johns Hopkins.
Right.
Go down the list.
Yeah.
What was the difference there? Within a system that was very efficient, you had a series of chancellors who believed in a separation of church and state. In other words, somehow the efficacy, the quality of the research was somehow demeaned if they worked closely with the private sector. So Amgen largely was founded on IP that came out of UCLA. The chancellor at that time wanted nothing to do with this new startup called Amgen to locate around UCLA. So flash forward, point is, if you don't have a leadership team, a chancellor, a president, who completely supports research, commercialization, innovation outcomes, you won't get it. They put disincentives in place. I think one clear message that can be granted is it's part of the university's mission, especially land grant universities here in the Heartland. It is part of their land grant mission, but it's not held closely. It's not, at the top of the priority list. So number one, that's something that I would address. Also, I think you need to get more resources into the tech transfer offices.
Right.
You need greater engagement with the private sector. So I believe in what I call bi-directional innovation at universities. So typically think of it as a unidirectional from the university out to the private sector. But I firmly believe, and if you look at the data, it tends to support this. If industry is engaged with universities earlier on, they can, one, help identify early stage IP that may not really have that much commercial value, or potential, I should say, and therefore maybe you don't invest as heavily in it. And also they can provide early stage feedback where there may be some higher probability of commercialization success. And you're also finding industry research that can help inform the university discovery process. I also think we need to look at more seed funds, and many universities are doing this. In fact, the Walton Family Foundation made a grant to the University of Arkansas to develop the Chancellor's Innovation Fund. It's kind of this early stage seed fund that encourages collaboration. So there's many things that we could do just by learning best practices here within the United States at research universities. And much of that would be applicable to federal research labs as well. There's so much, sitting in shoe boxes in the floors and filing cabinets hid away at federal labs. We just have to do a much more efficient job in getting industry, getting those who want access to that IP to get it out to the real world.
Well, that's music to my ears. I just as a follow-on to your point about Michigan, we're actually doing two, what we call them road shows on the SCALE challenge, the Supply Chain and Logistics Enterprises challenge that we're working on in partnership with the Walton Foundation and Walton Family Foundation, pardon me. And I'm very excited about it. We have one of our inventions in the challenge from Michigan, Michigan State actually, but we are also going to be, we're working with the University of Michigan and Michigan State. We're going to be doing two, road shows there. We got their attention. We're very, very excited about it. And they're engaging their entire university, every single bit of the university, the law school, the business school, et cetera, and thrilled about that. Another thing that I would like to add on to what you just mentioned was you're describing actually this blueprint we created for the NIH. We did this transformation engagement for the NIH. The NIH has many, many thousands of inventions sitting on the shelf. There's an enormous opportunity there, a treasure trove of inventions, and they do 270 deals a year. About 70% of them do not go forward. So the question was, how do we get more inventions? How do we get more throughput out of the NIH? And so we developed this blueprint, and some of the elements of the blueprint, I'd love to share it with you, go directly to what you're talking about, because we researched best practices across different universities and also companies that systematically commercialize their inventions. So, these are, I just love your perspective, very, very insightful. And just going back to the Midwest and this conference, at the Milken conference, you hosted a panel and you talked about millennials flocking to the Midwest. And now you're talking about how the research institutes in the Midwest do a very good job of commercializing research. Is there a relationship between millennials going to the Midwest and innovation being commercialized there?
I think there is. It's interesting that you mentioned that. We have a study currently underway with one of our senior fellows, Joel Kotkin, that I used to collaborate with at the Milken Institute. He's at Chapman University today, and he's done a lot of work in the Heartland. But they're investigating millennials returning to the Heartland. So this could be millennials that may be raised here or went to college here and then went to either coast principally. And what we're finding is that many of those millennials that are returning are locating in communities where you have research universities. Now, it's not just about the research universities, but it's the ecosystem that's developed around them. Mm-hmm. And so you're starting to see that Nashville is a real magnet for that activity. Mm. You're also seeing it, at the University of Minnesota around there. St. Louis has seen some of this activity. Certainly, you go down to Texas, Austin. I just read a piece on most dynamic metropolitans, and Austin was number 7 and was third among large metros in the United States. And it's just remarkable the success that Austin has had. And a lot of that California human capital that's moving to Austin, and also companies based in California, mostly tech companies such as Apple. In fact, this is a footnote in history. About 15 years ago, Steve Jobs was at an event, and we were chatting about where should we be looking to expand outside of Silicon Valley? What were good locations? And I told him he should take a look at Austin, the engineering talent. And today, Apple has over 5,000 employees in Austin. So the point being that research universities can attract companies from elsewhere, and that's an attractive tool. If you're trying to lure them back, they may have been working in the tech sector in San Francisco or Silicon Valley. They may not have a clear path to be in the money in terms of the options that have been granted. And after you've been there 5, 7, 10 years, and you're no longer in the money, and you're looking at starting a family, I've already started one. Mm-hmm. You look, for instance, San Francisco for a 2-bedroom apartment, starting at $5,000 a month. Yeah. Suddenly, the Heartland looks to be attractive, and there is some evidence this is beginning to occur.
Well, a couple items to follow on to that is, I'd love to get your perspective on what is it about the ecosystems that are being created. But I also want to put a plug in for South by Southwest, a panel that Ross and I will be on together. And the voting is going to come out on August 5th. So for those listening, please vote for our panel on the panel picker. But just going back to, also, I'm going to build on what you said, Virginia, right now, we're going to have a large influx of Amazon people coming into Virginia. So I think it's going to really boost the ecosystem here. Hopefully it won't go to 5,000 a month. But and it's not in the heartland, but it's another example.
Yeah.
But I'd love to get your perspective on going back to what you were talking about with the ecosystems that are being created. You said that people are coming back because of the ecosystems. What's special about what's being created in these ecosystems that is attracting, beyond even the innovation that's the sparks in people's eyes, if you will, of knowing there's a possibility of creating something new. What else is special about the ecosystems that are being created in the Midwest?
Well, as you know, if you look at venture capital's distribution, 75% of it's Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Southern California, New York, Boston, right?
Mm-hmm.
The center of the country gets like 5% of national venture capital.
Right. Right.
We are starting to see, it's not there's a lack of capital in the heartland, there's a perceived higher risk, a reluctance to invest in early stage companies that is based on intellectual property. They don't have the assets, the physical assets they typically have. And so we're starting to see communities, many of them heavily university based, that have angel networks that are forming.
Mm-hmm.
So what you want to do is you want to have more companies that are venture ready. I would say that's the challenge. And I think Steve Case kind of says the same thing in Rise and the Rest. You need to have more companies coming out in the knowledge innovation space that are venture ready. Mm-hmm. And that has been something that the Heartland has overall not done as well in. So you're trying to build that financial acumen. It's not just about the money, it's about the smart money. Mm-hmm. It's about all the entrepreneurs, the serial entrepreneurs who have decided to go back and investing. They may get involved in a company themselves again, but it kind of recirculates. And you're beginning to see some of these entrepreneurial ecosystems begin to become a bit more dense here. Austin is a great example of that. I would say Nashville is as well. In that kind of Ann Arbor area, Rochester, Minnesota, with Mayo Clinic and around that. And so you're starting to see that here, but there's still much more that needs to be done to fill in those gaps, with a lot of it being the financial gaps.
Mm-hmm. As part of the scale challenge, the supply chain and logistics enterprises challenge, what we're doing is it's an 8 to 12 month process in this challenge where we invite teams to come in from all around the world, and they compete for the privilege of launching companies around these inventions in the challenge. The inventions in the challenge are inventions that we believe could truly transform supply chains. And then the companies that are going to be formed will be actually in Northwest Arkansas. They will all be going to Northwest Arkansas. And at the end of this challenge, we're going to be orchestrating an event in Northwest Arkansas called an investor forum, where we'll be bringing 40 to 60 investors from outside of Northwest Arkansas into Northwest Arkansas to really try to shine a light on the talent that is going to be there. It already is there. It's going to be there, some additional talent, and some of these transformational companies that will be based in Northwest Arkansas. So we're really excited about that initiative. And part of that program is to train the teams that come into the challenge in a very rigorous manner in how to be an entrepreneur. There's 40 classes, 12 company building exercises, 16 weeks of hot seats. And we want to have these teams win competitions all around the world, just to show that, investment is pouring into the heartland, and it's investment into smart money investment into very strong, robust, entrepreneurial talent. So, like I said, thrilled about that initiative in our partnership with the Walton Family Foundation. Beyond that, and I guess just to kind of wrap up, what would you say are, your leaving thought about the call to action that people on this podcast should be thinking about with regards to going into these universities in the heartland, getting the inventions, commercializing them, the incentive structures? We've talked about a lot of different things, and one of the things I was going to go back to is the industry segments specifically that are the strength of the heartland. What advice or call to action would you leave people with in summary from all this conversation?
Yeah, so here's how I would summarize it. We actually have work underway right now on the importance of young firms and their knowledge intensiveness in terms of job creation over the long term. To boil it down, we are looking at, since the Great Recession, so from 2010 forward, how much of the overall economic growth among metropolitan areas and also micropolitans can you explain by the percent of total employment by metro, by micro, that is represented by young firms, 5 years of age or less. So in 2010, when you start, take that snapshot, and subsequent economic growth measured by job creation over that period. Our initial results are we can explain 30% of the variation in total job growth among metropolitan areas and micropolitan areas based on two measures. One, that young firm measure, what percent of total employment do young firms represent? So a measure of entrepreneurship, startup, scale up, initial scale up. And the knowledge intensiveness of those young firms. So looking at data, a new data set that shows the number of employees at those young firms that have a bachelor's degree or above. And once you combine those two, you can explain 30% of the variation, holding all other factors constant in job creation across the United States since 2010. So I say that because so many of those impactful young firms that grow, create high value added jobs, they come out of universities that have received venture-backed financing. And like, for example, San Jose, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, Denver, Boston, they are off the scale in terms of the knowledge intensiveness of those young firms. And so a high proportion of that is coming out of the university's IP. It's about your economic future. If you don't participate in this activity, you simply were relegated to a second-class status.
Knowledge intensiveness. Well, Ross, it has been such a delight to host you today. You are a fountain of knowledge, and I love, by the way, I can't wait to see that report, that study that you're doing right now. I cannot wait to see it. So
I can't either, because there's a lot of writing that needs to be done.
Oh gosh. So again, thrilled to host you today. Again, my name is Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advancing Innovation. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. Vote for us on the panel picker with South by Southwest. And we will hopefully see you in Austin coming up soon. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you, Rosemary.